Hi, this is David Miller, and I'm here with the third in a series of mini-lectures on Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet. Today we're going to talk about love in a time of patriarchy. Last time we talked about the difference between the lineage family and the restricted patriarchal nuclear family, and the broader historical changes that accompanied the gradual transition between those two types of family organization. Well, I think it's pretty clear when we turn back to the play that Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet depicts the older social world, complete with the church and the extended kinship network. The independent city-state of Verona in Italy resembles that older regionally based network of clientage and kinship as it had existed in England. In the 16th century, this world was already beginning to pass into history in England, as the centralizing tendencies of the new monarchy challenged regional loyalties and power structures. Prince Aeschylus is the force in the play who most closely corresponds to the English monarchy as it seeks to break up and control clan structures, except of course that he conspicuously fails in this role. One prominent feature of the clan structure was the vendetta, or blood feud, central to Shakespeare's play. The Montagues and the Capulets, those two houses alike in dignity, push their rivalry to the point of self-destruction. This element of the plot may express a sense of alienation from the not yet departed culture of the lineage family. At the end of the play, the families are both extinguished by the deaths of their heirs. What is it that dies with Romeo and Juliet? Think about it, it's the family names. Romeo and Juliet seek to make romantic love the basis for marriage at the expense of interest and political alliance. In this way, they look forward to the affective individualism that's associated with the newer family model and with the idea of companionate marriage. But in their world, the nuclear family and companionate marriage don't yet exist as possibilities for life. Romeo and Juliet reject lineage as an absolute basis of personal identity, but they do so without an alternative basis to turn to. Elizabethan England was a society organized along the lines of deference and authority. One critic, Kirby Farrell, in his analysis of the play, describes how personal identities take shape within such a social order. The cornerstone of personal identity is a powerful identification with the patriarch. Like the religious stories on which it is based, this system deifies the father and glorifies submission to him. The difference is that within this culture, the biblical stories are used to deify the human father. What is it like within such a culture to be a child or servant? Dependency breeds an attitude that Farrell calls worshipful self-effacement. This means the dependent identifies with the master of the household, and through him with the immortality of the lineage. The self that is effaced on a personal level finds its apotheosis or glorified form in the immortality of the lineage family and its honor embodied in the patriarch. There is no place in such a system for personal autonomy. The desire for self-determination can only be construed as rebellion. Rebellion, however, is taboo. The father doesn't simply possess power. He is endowed with authority, or the right to wield legitimate power. Pure force is the attribute of the younger males in the household. They are held in check not by the physical dominance of the father, but by his prestige and authority as a judge, internalized in the form of conscience. Once internalized, this authority blocks the sons and nephews of the house from targeting the father with self-aggrandizing impulses, which instead are redirected toward the rival household. Here's a diagram that illustrates the point. We start with the self-aggrandizing impulses of the male dependents, and remember that these tend to be vicarious, as we see with the servants in the opening scene, and in a different way with Tybalt at the banqueting scene. Servants have no stake in the feud except insofar as they identify with their masters, but since they have no other legitimate way to assert themselves, they do so by identifying with the prestige of the master, to which they attach their own crude fantasies of self-assertion. Tybalt's barely restrained rage against Romeo threatens Capulet's authority at the banquet that closes Act 1, and it bursts out unchecked in the opening scene of Act 3, the turning point in the plot of the play. In less fiery souls, such impulses are first blocked by the father's authority, internalized as conscience. Blocked impulses are redirected away from the father, and then must either be internalized as guilt or redirected toward a rival clan. It's pretty clear that in Romeo and Juliet, the patriarchs themselves, they get pretty feisty in the opening scene, but as scene 2 begins, Capulet is already telling Paris, "'Tis not hard, I think, for men so old as we to keep the peace." What's hard is keeping the young Turks in line. So those are the options for the impulse to rebel: redirect or turn back. Tybalt is a clear instance of the first pathway. Do Romeo and Juliet represent the second? This is the intriguing question that Kirby Farrell's argument ends on. He argues that Romeo and Juliet do represent the internalization of rebellion. He says their romantic love imitates the fundamental structure of patriarchal identity because it deifies the beloved and turns love into worship, just as patriarchy does with the father. He says that their love reproduces in the beloved the engulfing, life-giving power of godlike parents. And he goes through the language that the lovers use to describe one another to support and develop that point. In Romeo and Juliet's erotic fantasies about each other, he discerns a hidden wish to identify with the imaginary figure of the immortal father. This, he says, is the reason the young lovers reproduce within their relationship to each other the underlying psychic form of patriarchal clan identity with its peculiar combination of self-effacement and apotheosis in a glorified other. In other words, Romeo and Juliet don't escape this dynamic, they simply transfer it from the father to each other. Farrell argues that, for this reason, we should see in the lovers' suicides the hand of the fantasy parent punishing the rebellious child. The dependent who owes his father a life also owes him a death, which comes as the punishment for rebellious wishes. Farrell therefore emphasizes the setting of the lovers' suicides. He sees them as devoured by the ancestral tomb, and he sees in this an image of them being reabsorbed by the patriarchy they tried to escape. It remains difficult in his view to distinguish suicide as an effort to punish the parent from suicide as self-punishment for transgression. Romeo and Juliet is popular today as a tragedy of eternal love. Farrell's interpretation turns this view inside out, giving us instead a tragedy of thwarted rebellion, in which the social order and the structure of the family are central characters. We can see the play situated, as I suggested earlier, on the cusp of change, because Romeo and Juliet try to break away from the old order, but have nowhere to go. They seek a future that has not yet arrived.